Hello, comrades, and welcome to the Revolution Report. I'm Editor-in-Chief Donald Corder. Thanks for joining us on this live stream. If you're joining us from YouTube, welcome. If you're joining us from Telegram, welcome as well, because we are now able to stream to different platforms. Obviously, we started as a YouTube channel, but we're growing into bigger and better things. If you haven't already subscribed to our Telegram channel, please do so. We've recently exceeded 1,300 subscribers, which I think is actually good news and probably an occasion to do another Soviet memorabilia giveaway like the recent one we did. But yeah, so welcome everyone for joining us, wherever you're joining from. It's a very important subject, the topic of today's live stream that I chose. Of course, we're talking about the Uhuru Movement, the fact that they're facing political persecution for basically telling the truth about the Ukraine conflict. This is a story that the mainstream media has really been silent about, number one. Number two, this is a story of basically spitting on the grave of democracy that has long been dead, and that Washington continues to try to convince everyone that this zombified idea of democracy that the United States tries to sell around the world is still actually something that's alive and something to be proud about. Obviously, if you're watching this channel, you're likely already of the mindset that that is something that is ridiculous. But that's the second thing about today's story. The third thing is that this is another example of Washington's perpetual political projection, basically. Constantly projecting its political wrongdoings onto its enemies. If you haven't already watched our DPRK miniseries, you should definitely do that. In episode 1, we really talk about this idea of political projection that the United States loves to do, and in the second episode as well. We in the DPRK miniseries specifically talk about how everything the United States blamed North Korea for doing throughout its history is basically what the United States has been doing to North Korea. The biggest example is the fact that the United States is obviously always trying to say that North Korea is some sort of nuclear pariah state, that it wants to blow up the whole planet, that it's threatening everyone with nuclear weapons, when in reality North Korea actually joined the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Pact because it was constantly being threatened with nuclear annihilation by the United States. And part of that pact has to do with the protection of non-nuclear nations from threats from nuclear nations. So North Korea joined that pact. The United States continued to threaten North Korea, and after some time, obviously, the country was like, well, this treaty is not worth the paper it's written on. The only way we're going to be able to protect ourselves is with our own nuclear arsenal. So we've got a pretty similar situation here with the Uhuru Movement. Basically everything that the United States is accusing this group of being involved with here, it is doing all over the world. Washington is doing this all over the world. We don't even know if the allegations against the Uhuru Movement are correct or not, but we know that Washington has definitely done what it's accusing this movement of doing many times over all around the world. So, lastly, this is an example of a number of core Marxist-Leninist concepts. This is an example of class struggle. This is an example of neo-colonial struggle. This is an example of Western hypocrisy at its finest. So, without further ado, I'm going to get into what exactly I'm talking about. I'm sure already a lot of you who are watching have already heard about this situation with the Uhuru Movement and what's going on. But for those of you who might be new to this or didn't even hear the recent news about it, I'm going to start from the beginning, give a little background to these indictments that we're going to be talking about. And that starts pretty much in August of last year, when the FBI raided the offices of the Uhuru Movement, also known as the African People's Socialist Party. It's a black power, black liberation, Marxist-Leninist organization in the United States with a really good political line, and they support the Russia's side in the Ukraine conflict, and that's essentially why they are being threatened with jail time now, simply because they're supporting Russia's position. So in August of last year, like I said, the FBI raided their offices. They seized the organization's computers, their emails, all of their personal stuff, completely went right through the offices. Apparently people were in one of the places that they raided at the time where the FBI showed up with flashbang grenades, automatic rifles, and in one interview, the chairman of the organization is talking to Democracy Now! You can look that up if you want. It's a very long interview, so I didn't add it into this live stream, but he talks about how, you know, the FBI came outside of the door and they're like, everyone get on the ground, we're coming in whether you like it or not. So basically the government said that this organization was colluding with Russia because they formed a relationship with a Russia-based non-governmental organization to help them defend Russia's position in the Ukraine conflict and everything. That's the allegation. And the actual government documents say that, or back in August, they were accused of, I don't have the quotes for back in August. I have the quotes from the indictment that we're going to get to soon. Back in August, basically they were accused by the American government of sowing discord in the United States. And of course, the chairman of the organization said that the police barged in there, but the organization denies having been controlled by Moscow. And they even said, quote, the U.S. government has never been in and was not founded in the interest of black people, so therefore it would be absurd for us to unite with that government. So obviously, in this instance, the Russian government and black liberation organizations have something in common. That doesn't mean one is being controlled by the other, and that's exactly what representatives from this organization have been trying to get across since back in August. That was when they first started making public statements about this. They've made more recent ones that you can check out on the internet as well. It's also very long, so I didn't want to go too much into that in this live stream. But I do have a local media report from, and funny enough, this is all happening in St. Petersburg, Florida. So, but I downloaded a local media report that kind of gives us the gist of some of this stuff that happened, and the reason why I want to show it, and obviously it's from like a local basic mainstream media perspective, but the reason I want to show it is because it has some of that footage when the FBI raided these offices, and it has some statements by members of the organization clarifying their positions. So let's take a look at that right now.
For that. St. Petersburg, Florida, at the center of an FBI investigation, the U.S. Department of Justice is looking into the Russian government's alleged interference in U.S. politics, including right here in our Bay Area. Last week, the FBI raided the Uhuru House, home to the African People's Socialist Party. The group has been a fixture in St. Pete for decades. Well, today, 10 Tampa Bay's Liz Crawford met with members of the group. They say the feds are after their movement and what they stand for, and it has nothing to do with Russia.
A formal news conference on their terms in their building and a chance to tell their side of the story.
They say it's about this thing with Russia, but it's not about this thing with Russia.
According to the indictment, leaders with the African People's Socialist Party are accused of coordinating with Russian government officials over the last 8 years. Last week, FBI agents took over the Uhuru House, located in South St. Pete. So far, no one with the organization has outright denied the allegations.
We are not speaking to the issues within the indictment because we know that, first of all, it's illegitimate.
Thursday, Uhuru members showed reporters property damage they say was caused by the feds. Broken glass, torn up wood. We saw similar damage upstairs. Leaders said doors were busted when FBI agents raided the building.
They're trying to put together this case that is not there against our party, against our movement, and against the black community.
A former FBI special agent in charge told 10 Tampa Bay the Russians look for groups willing to spread their message.
Is they don't really care what party is in power, what political party is in power here. This is all about weakening the United States, whether, it's pitting Democrats against Republicans or rich against poor, or workers against management. It doesn't matter.
Preying on the United States through divided states of mind.
Literally trying to undermine the confidence, the trust, the unity that exists in a nation. And they'll do it in a lot of different ways. And this example is just one of the many ways in which they will do that.
Liz Crawford, 10 Tampa Bay.
And because of the ongoing investigation here, the FBI did decline to comment on the statements made today by Uhuru leaders.
So the thing that really gets me about that last part, when we saw this expert in Russian, I guess, meddling or whatever, is that he talks about how he talks about how Russia's trying to exploit any divisions it can in the United States to forward or advance its nefarious agenda. But dude, there's no addressing of the fact that there are problems in the United States. So the fact that Russia is upset that the United States is bankrolling NATO and bringing supporting hostile militaries on its borders, so maybe it might have something in common with people who have been fighting for liberation from neocolonialism for decades now. How does that make it Russia's fault? Don't you think it would make more sense for the United States to fix the problems in its own country, which obviously we know it can't in its current condition, rather than put it on Russia because this organization made friends with a Russian organization? It's crazy, and it still hasn't been established whether or not they actually got money from them. That's something that's still only alleged. And it's not only that either. I also just want to bring that point home by mentioning something that a quote that a lot of these local media outlets are using on their websites and articles about what's happened. So there's this random political science professor at the University of Tampa, Nicole Ford, an expert on Russia also, whose quote here continues to show up again in all these articles. It says, quote, "Russia has a history of using black Americans throughout history for this type of propaganda without forwarding their agendas." So I really wonder why she would get the impression that black liberation organizations that have sought help from Russia have not had their agendas forwarded. Is it because Russia is just trying to control them without actually forwarding their agendas at all, which doesn't really make any sense in the first place, because I thought they had, common interests here. If this was the case, wouldn't they be trying to exploit the divisions in American society to advance the goals of these organizations so that divisions can become bigger? But anyway, we don't have to get into the logic of that. The point is that the reason that these organizations have not seen their agendas significantly grow in prominence or be fulfilled in any certain way is because the FBI has repressed all of them violently. I mean, we know about the Black Panthers, right? The FBI launched a campaign of infiltration of the organization, a misinformation campaign against the organization. They used to harass them. I mean, there's a whole reason. The whole reason why the Black Panther organization for community self-defense was organized was because the police were abusing black people in the inner city. So they formed a self-defense organization, and the police weren't able to do that as much anymore. And of course, we all know how that organization ended. The FBI raided the residences of the leadership in the middle of the night, or maybe it wasn't in the middle of the night, but they were all sleeping, and the FBI killed all of them in their sleep. Open fired on them, like without any sort of resistance to begin with. They were all asleep, and And a pregnant woman was even killed in that. That's only one example of how the U.S. security apparatus has repressed black people who, or black organizations who have actually tried to resist American imperialism. And the Black Panthers, of course, they were aligned with Soviet Marxist-Leninism at the time. And there's also, we can also talk about Paul Robeson, who traveled much around the Soviet Union and had a lot of his, had a very good impression of the Soviet Union. He was harassed by the House on Un-American Affairs Committee during the McCarthy era, and they took away his passport because he refused to say the Soviet Union was bad, which basically, cut a huge amount of his money that he made from touring. As maybe some of you know, he was a singer and he was greatly popular in the Soviet Union. When he lost his passport, that basically, put him on the brink of poverty. We can also talk about organizations that didn't even have support from Russia. I mean, what about the police bombing of the the organization MOVE in Philadelphia, where a police helicopter dropped a bomb on a residential neighborhood, killed a bunch of people, including women and children? That organization was another black liberation organization, but they had nothing to do with Russia. So this narrative that Russia uses black liberation organizations in the United States and doesn't forward their agenda at all is just like complete nonsense. The reason why these agendas or these organizations have made minimal progress in the United States is because we have such an advanced state repression apparatus. That's the reason. They've been repressed out of existence. Whenever an organization becomes well organized enough or popular enough to stand some sort of a chance against the status quo that's oppressing people, obviously the FBI reacts, puts informants, tries to spread misinformation about them, tries to harass them, tries to threaten them, and the end game for most of these organizations has been death, has been assassination, essentially, by the FBI. So that's what I wanted to say about that contradiction of how these like basic experts on Russia and political scientists make out this situation to be. But let's get into the actual details of the Department of Justice indictment that came out recently against the leaders, or some of the members of the African People's Socialist Party, as well as some Russians who were allegedly involved in this. But I'm just going to be focusing on the Americans in this situation. So I have the indictment here, and I'm just going to share my screen here. Just give me one sec. All right. So here we have the indictment. All right. This is the official indictment. U.S. citizens and Russian intelligence officers charged with conspiring to use U.S. citizens as illegal agents of the Russian government. Defendants sought to sow discord and spread pro-Russian propaganda and interfere in elections within the United States. And in terms of these elections, just to give you some background, they're talking about like some alleged interference in some local elections in like St. Petersburg, Florida, some like completely irrelevant stuff that, again, the Uhuru Movement has denied any of this stuff that they're charged with. And so I've already read through the indictment. I'm sure as I'm talking right now, you guys are doing a little bit of reading, but I'm going to leave it on the screen as I talk about it. I have some quotes here that I wanted to bring to your attention more than anything else to give you a summary of these charges. So, first of all, quote, it accuses the Uhuru Movement of, quote, working on behalf of the Russian government and in conjunction with the Russian Federal Security Service, or FSB, to conduct a multi-year foreign malign influence campaign in the United States. Here's another charge. The Russian defendants recruited, funded, and directed... actually, this is against the Russians involved, allegedly involved. The Russian defendants recruited and funded and directed U.S. political groups to act as unregistered illegal agents of the Russian government and sow discord and spread pro-Russian propaganda. The indicted intelligence officers in particular participated in covertly funding and directing candidates for local office within the United States. And I also have here, this quote here I wanted to read by Mr. Acting Assistant Director Kurt Rano of the FBI's Counterintelligence Division. Today's announcement paints a harrowing picture of Russian government actions and the lengths to which the FSB will go to interfere with our elections, sow discord in our nation, and ultimately recruit U.S. citizens to their efforts. All Americans should be deeply concerned by the tactics employed by the FSB and remain vigilant to any attempt to undermine our democracy. Wow. So first of all, it looks like it didn't show up on your screen there. Sorry, I forgot to press the transition. Anyway, you should be able to see it now. And this is the quote I was talking about. Here's the actual Department of Justice indictment. And you can check it out for yourself. I suggest reading the whole thing. But I want to talk about just how silly this is. So these are obviously some big loaded terms that really don't mean all that much. It basically means that the organization may or may not have received some money from a foreign organization, which, as far as I'm concerned, that's not illegal, and that doesn't even require you to register under the Foreign Agency Registration Act necessarily. And number two, what's the difference between sowing what is the qualifiable difference between quote unquote sowing discord and just agreeing with pro-Russian positions? The line is not clear where that is. And I'll tell you, and I'll give you all an example of how crazy this indictment is in that regard, because I have two things that are specifically mentioned in the indictment here. It's one of them. I guess I'll switch back to the indictment here so you can see what I'm talking about. One second. Also, these are the people, the Americans that have been indicted. So this is the first thing, the example that's given of how they sowed discord, I guess. One focus of Ayanov, who apparently is the Russian FSB agent involved. One focus of Ayanov's alleged influence operation was to create the appearance of American popular support for Russia's annexation of territories in Ukraine. For example, in May 2020, Ayanov allegedly sent a request he stated was from Russia, the Donetsk People's Republic, an apparent reference to a Russian-occupied region in eastern Ukraine. And Yeshitela, which is the chairman, and members of other U.S. political groups to make statements in support of the independence of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, a Russian-backed breakaway state in eastern Ukraine. So that if that qualifies as sowing discord in the United States, and anyone who does that can be thrown in jail for up to 10 years, then I think myself and most of my viewers are probably going to be on the FBI's most wanted list soon. Ayanov later allegedly touted to the FSB that Yeshitela's, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that name, Yeshitela, I think, video recorded statement of support was the first time that American non-profit organizations congratulated citizens of the occupied region. Okay, again, we have no, it's allegedly, because we have absolutely no evidence that's been put forward to say that that's true. Another one. This is another thing. Ayanov's use of the African People's Socialist Party to promote Russian propaganda relating to Ukraine allegedly continued after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Oh no. On the day Russia invaded Ukraine, February 24th, 2020, Ayanov allegedly emailed Nevel an urgent message which contained pro-Russian talking points in support of the invasion. Scandalous. Thereafter, throughout March 2022, the African People's Socialist Party repeatedly hosted Ayanov via video conference to discuss the war, during which Ayanov falsely stated that anyone who supported Ukraine also supported Nazism and white supremacy. And Yeshitela and another APSP member allegedly made statements of solidarity with the Russian government. Okay. So, did you make a statement of solidarity with the Russian government? Well, send him to jail. Jesus Christ, dude. This is like... I mean, I've got a lot of other stuff I want to talk about in connection to this, but just my general impressions of this, and I am not one to just be like, to throw this word fascism around, you know? I'm really reluctant to call America fascist because I think it's a very specific term, and I'm not exactly sure if I see the United States as fascist according to, you know, the general scientific understanding of what it means to be fascist, you know? Do I think the United States is authoritarian? I've long thought that. It's nonsense that it's democratic. But this kind of language, like, over some people that are saying that Russia was right to defend the People's Republics, essentially. Just by saying that, they're sowing discord. They're traitors. They're running a pro-Russian propaganda campaign in the United States. It's absurd. It's really like it's like in Nazi Germany or fascist Italy when if someone just said they were a communist, throw them in a camp. That's like what they want to do. 10 years, up to 10 years in prison, is what these members of the African People's Socialist Party are facing, simply for supporting Russia in this, in the military operation. And, you know, we don't know the details of whether they got money from some Russian non-governmental organization. We don't know the details of whether that non-governmental organization even actually had ties to the Russian FSB. We don't know that stuff. But to be honest, here's the huge hypocrisy that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. Even if they were getting money from a Russian NGO, and even if this NGO had connections to Russia's FSB, it is completely and utterly hypocritical for Washington to criticize them for doing that, because Washington literally supports people through the same exact way all over the world to do their liberal bidding in all different types of countries. I'm working on a video right now that's going to be called The American Color Revolution Doctrine, and it's about how the United States orchestrates color revolutions around the world. It's literally, it's all through non-governmental organizations that receive money through the State Department. They're controlled by the United States State Department. Probably the CIA too, but essentially it's the same thing, you know? And that was what happened in Ukraine before Euromaidan. The United States government, through U.S. aid and the National Endowment for Democracy, they spent billions of dollars in Ukraine since the fall of the Soviet Union to basically change the narrative, the political atmosphere of the country so that it would become more conducive to Western democracy. They did the same thing in Georgia. USAID has a huge presence there, and they've been spending millions and millions of dollars, maybe even billions, since the fall of the Soviet Union. I don't know the exact figures there, but I'm pretty sure it's millions. To, like, if you read USAID about in Georgia, they want to, like, raise the new generations in the principles of democracy. They want to brainwash the newer generations into believing in the Western imperialist narrative. USAID even set up a bogus social media platform that paralleled Twitter to brainwash Cubans into overthrowing the communist government there. If you don't know about that, you should really look it up. US Aid in Cuba. They created a social media platform and it secretly distributed satellite equipment so that people could pick up the internet in places where that, you know, in places that public Wi-Fi was not available, so that they could use this this social media platform that was controlled by the State Department, that built up a following based on like seemingly innocent themes, you know, like sports, weather. People started using this platform because they had seemingly innocent topics, nothing political, until they reached around 60,000 regular subscribers and they started making anti-Cuban government propaganda. Eventually that failed, that project, and it was exposed by the Associated Press, but it's crazy. And in Bolivia, the US Aid was also trying to undermine the government of Evo Morales there. US Aid and the National Endowment for Democracy have been active around the world, and they do the bidding of the US State Department. Now, and these organizations have been so successful that they've overthrown governments, okay? And the United States is going to make a big fuss over the African People's Socialist Party, which, and I don't want to insult them, I think their organization is really cool and everything, but a lot of people have not heard of. It's not exactly at the forefront of the political discourse in the United States. And the U.S. government is going to make a big deal about that because they may or may not have received some money from some NGO that may have been connected to FSB. It's such big hypocrisy, and it's obvious that they're just being scapegoated so that the government can basically normalize these authoritarian practices. I mean, it's really a joke to think that stuff like this can go on in a country that is actually free or actually has democracy. I mean, of course, we saw that with Julian Assange too, and anyone who actually presented a serious threat to the U.S. government and its state secrets, you know. And also another thing, it's not only hypocritical, but it's a huge double standard, because if the shoe was on the other foot, imagine these people were making pro-Ukrainian propaganda, receiving money from organizations that were connected to the Ukrainian government. That's also a foreign power. That's also a foreign government. Why would you think the government would make them register as foreign agents? I highly doubt it. They would never make it into the papers. Nothing would happen. The FBI would not even bat an eyebrow at them, even though that is a foreign power. Why are these people not considered to be enemies of the state? The Ukrainian diaspora that has upheld the principles of Ukrainian neo-Nazi collaborators since the end of World War II. What about that? None of them have been investigated by the FBI. In fact, Stepan Bandera, the leader of the neo-Nazi the Nazi collaborators in World War II in Ukraine, was recruited by the CIA and MI6. So this just goes to show the total hypocrisy. It has nothing to do with sowing discord, making propaganda. It happens to do with the fact that Russia is against the interests of Washington's foreign policy agenda. But it has nothing to do with sowing discord in the United States. Isn't it? What discord has been sown? It's an absolutely ridiculous claim. And it's also, like, especially hypocritical to say that the African People's Socialist Party, by taking pro-Russian positions, is undermining U.S. democracy, when, to be honest, I would say that the majority of America's working class, their interests coincide with those of the Russian government right now. In a weird enough way, both of them have objectively anti-imperialist interests, right? What is the expansion of NATO on the borders of Russia going to mean for working class people in the United States? One sec, let me just fix my camera here. But what is that going to mean for people in the United States? Obviously, we know that is going to be bad for Russia, because There's going to be a bigger military presence of American imperialism on the border of Russia, and also, you're going to have a government in Ukraine right on the border of Russia as well that's going to have neo-Nazis in it. So why is this not beneficial for the American working class either? Well, first of all the money that's being given to the Ukrainian government in terms of weapons, in terms of just straight out financial aid, and I'm not just talking about Ukraine either. I'm talking about the defense industry in general. The sheer amount of money it's over like $800 billion annually now. This year's budget, if I remember correctly, for the military, over $800 billion just to maintain American imperialist hegemony around the world. That money could be used for a lot more better purposes, like, for example, I don't know, making the healthcare in the United States, which is the most expensive healthcare industry in the world and one of the worst quality in the industrialized world. Maybe some of that money can be used to make that better and universally accessible. Maybe we can make education free and start paying professors and adjunct professors like humans rather than some homeless people. I mean, they're paid horribly in universities in the United States on the whole, and that obviously negatively affects the American education, the quality of education, and also, of course, this continued expansion of NATO and Western imperialist interests are just pushing the world towards an existential conflict in which nobody's going to win. I don't think we're close to a nuclear conflict right now, but the continued expansion of NATO is just going to bring us closer to that, definitely. The idea that it's a defensive alliance is just nonsense, especially when Russia has said time and time again, the expansion of NATO negatively affects our national security. And numerous treaties in the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe prohibit the expansion of military alliances at the expense of other countries' national security. So when, NATO officials say that we can take into our military alliance whoever we want, that's just such nonsense. That is the ideology of an aggressive fascist military alliance, and a very aggressive offensive military alliance that's just looking for war. And that's horrible, I mean, like I said, I'm not sure I'm over the fence onto saying that America's fascist yet, but it's very, very close to that at the very least. So, and also that's not to mention as well the kind of damage to the global economy that has been wrought by the United States picking a fight with Russia. The Western sanctions that were launched against Russia have severely hurt the world economy, and more so, it's hurt the West specifically. Tons of economists right now are saying that we're looking down the barrel of a looming recession, and if that's going to be cyclical or structural when that happens, it's not even clear yet. But so I want to go basically into a bit of the conclusions that we can draw from this and the potential repercussions of all this as well. Obviously, like I said earlier in the video, this is just going to normalize straight up authoritarian repressions of people that don't agree with the U.S. government, that are going to be arbitrary, that aren't going to require any other sort of explanation other than they were trying to sow discord. They were making propaganda. I mean, what even is propaganda? When people say something's propaganda, they're just saying that they don't agree with it, essentially. Obviously, there's such thing as, like, fakes, but there's also, both fake information in the information sphere has appeared on both sides of the Ukraine conflict, in the Ukrainian side and the Russian side as well. But to say that completely legitimate and fact-based positions that the Russian government takes are propaganda is just basically ad hominem. It's just some nonsense. So we're looking at the implication of this is the application of authoritarian tactics without any sort of accountability, without any sort of necessity for an explanation, and it's basically it's basically reinforcing the legacy of authoritarianism in the United States to an extent that we have not seen since the McCarthy era. That's what I would say. And, you know, it's just another example of the colossal hypocrisy of late-stage liberal capitalism as well. I mean, this concept of a free society is so blatantly in contradiction with reality. I mean, we're pretty much all excluded, right? We're apparently living in a free market, competitive world capitalist system where the vast majority of the population of the human race is completely excluded from the bourgeoisie, from the upper capitalist class. I mean, the people who really run everything, the ultra rich, you know, let alone the rich, because I mean, even there are tons of rich people that don't even have a say in what the ultra rich control around the world. If you're a worker, you know, you're living in neoliberalism where your buying power, even if your salary stays the same over the years, you're losing the buying power of your salary. Your living conditions are getting worse. You're becoming relatively impoverished, exactly as Karl Marx said would happen back in the 1800s, around 200 years ago when he wrote Das Kapital. It's exactly what he's talking about. And yet this is, like I said again, this is free market capitalism, where competition apparently exists, and there's no such thing as cornering the markets by monopolies. I can't believe there's economists that say that these days. But obviously I'm criticizing this whole situation from the left wing, right? I'm criticizing this as capitalism in decay, Western imperialism getting really desperate, you know, because the age of Western unipolarity, the age of the domination, the unchallenged domination of Western finance capital is over. And that's the new period of multipolarity that was announced basically once the Ukraine conflict happened and all this stuff went down. This is a new page in history. We're no longer going to be living in this time period of world domination of Western finance capital. An alternative system is coming together that involves Russia and China, Iran, Syria, and Cuba, and a number of other countries all over the world, in a similar way that there was in the Cold War. Obviously, this other system, this other global economic sphere is not the same as how it was in the Cold War when that sphere was Soviet and socialist, but we're still seeing now again another conflict between two different global economic systems, and this is another reason why it's hilarious when people say that the whole world condemns Russia. We posted a map about this on our Telegram chat, or our Telegram channel rather, showing just how many people showing just how many countries actually condemn Russia. It's not the whole world. It's basically the United States, Europe, Australia, and Japan, with some exceptions. But the rest of the world either supports Russia or is not getting involved, or is Russia leaning, you know? And that's not surprising when you understand the world materially as it is right now. The whole world is not Western finance capital dominated anymore. It's just Europe and the United States and Australia and Japan, South Korea, some exceptions, but the rest of the world is starting to get with this other program, you know? So obviously I'm attacking it from a left-wing perspective, but you know what? Something we should really talk about is the criticism of what the U.S. government is doing to the Uhuru Movement from a right-wing perspective, because I'm sure a lot of you have heard that Tucker Carlson recently was, the rumors say that he was fired from Fox News. I haven't read any confirmation of that. Maybe there is, I don't know. But you may have heard that he's gone. He's not on Fox News anymore. And the reason I bring him up is because when this happened before his resignation or whatever, and he criticized the U.S. government, the Biden administration, and defended the Uhuru Movement from a right-wing perspective, saying that this is an attack on the First Amendment. So actually, I found this report that he did to be Quite interesting. Obviously, you know, we like Tucker when he says cool stuff, but I'm not the biggest fan because obviously he's also, you know, a right-winger that has nothing in common with communists. So let's take a look at this, and then we'll move on.
Well, as you've just heard, the Biden administration spends an awful lot of time covering up actual crimes committed by their political allies and their relatives. But for their critics, there is no such mercy. For the first time in our history, the government has begun to arrest people for saying things the White House doesn't like. That's the end of the First Amendment. Speech that's been protected for centuries in the United States is no longer protected. It's now a criminal act. We've told you about the grotesquely unconstitutional prosecution and then conviction of Douglas Mackey. The DOJ is trying to send Mackey to prison for a decade for making fun of Hillary Clinton's voters on Twitter. The media barely report the story. They don't seem to care at all. They seem to endorse it. No one in Congress has meaningfully pushed back against it. So this trend continues. The latest group of Americans to find their constitutionally protected opinions become felonies are, believe it or not, an organization of black nationalist left-wingers who oppose the war in Ukraine. The DOJ has just charged many in this group with seeking to, quote, sow discord, spread pro-Russia propaganda, and interfere in elections within the United States. Now, there's no evidence they interfered with any election. You're allowed to be pro-Russia. You're allowed to be pro-anything you want in the United States. Saying things the government doesn't like, having unfashionable opinions or opinions that are out of step with Joe Biden's opinions, that is not a crime. You can spread pro-Russia propaganda if you want to. You can spread anti-Russia propaganda if you want to. You can say whatever you want, but not anymore. According to the indictment, the criminals in question, quote, wrote articles that contained Russian propaganda and disinformation. Huh? They also gave speeches and posted videos that annoyed the State Department. Here's one of them.
There's a discussion about Russian military border buildup on its border with Ukraine, and how this represents a terrible threat to Ukraine by Russians. But there is no acknowledgement of the history that took us to this place, how the U.S. overthrew, participated in facilitating the overthrow of a government in Ukraine that was friendly to the Soviet Union. Nor does it talk about the history of this relationship between Ukraine and Russia. This is an ongoing aggression. It did not just start. It's been going on for a while, but the U.S. government relies on the ignorance of the people in this country and much of the world that's facilitated by people like Zuckerberg.
So, for whatever it's worth, we're not really sure who that guy is. We know he's American. Pretty sure that on a lot of issues, we likely would not agree with him. A lot of what he just said in that video seems to be true. But even if it weren't true, even if he was wrong, it would still be constitutionally protected speech. In a free country, which we had until recently, you are allowed by definition to have dumb opinions. Most of us do, but not anymore. So that man you just saw is facing 10 years behind bars for expressing views about Ukraine that the Biden administration doesn't want to hear. That's terrifying. Does no one else think that's terrifying? It is terrifying. And to that man's credit, whoever he is, he saw it coming. Here he is at a rally last month.
They have declared that black people are so stupid that it takes Russians to tell us that we are oppressed. I have never known a moment of black freedom for my entire life. I have never read of a moment since the beginning of a colonial mode of production where black people have been free. And yet they are saying that we are agents of some foreign power because we say black people must be free.
Okay, again, we're not defending that guy because we agree with all of his views. We probably don't. That is totally irrelevant. Whether you agree with what someone is saying has nothing to do with his right to say it. Americans are allowed to say what they think is true, period. If they take that right away, you are no longer a citizen, you are a slave. Subscribe to the Fox News YouTube channel to catch our nightly...
So yeah, there you go. Tucker Carlson's right-wing defense of these Uhuru guys. I mean, He also actually made a similar defense of them at the Heritage Foundation, if you can believe it or not. You can look that up on YouTube also, or on Twitter. It's made the rounds. But I just want to comment a little bit about the way the right-wing criticism of all this, because I think it's like I think it's a little ridiculous in itself. Obviously, I think it's cool that Tucker defended them, but I mean, I just don't understand when people are gonna learn that that freedom of speech is guaranteed in the United States by the First Amendment, unless you're in school, unless you're at work, unless you're on private property, unless you're on most public property, unless you pose some sort of threat to the establishment outside the bounds of acceptability within the discourse of the two-party political system. And I mean, basically, essentially, you should, if you're going to speak your mind and actually do something productive with what you're saying, you should be prepared to get repressed, even with the First Amendment. I mean, the testaments to that are not just clear with what happened to Uhuru during the Biden administration, because this is another thing. Tucker Carlson tries to make it like, oh, it's the Democrats, like a Democratic Party thing. It's not just the Democratic Party. This happened also with Julian Assange is the best example. He was wanted by the U.S. government throughout multiple administrations: Obama, Trump, and now Biden. Trump is a Republican. I mean, in World War I, Woodrow Wilson, obviously he was a Democrat back then, but back then the platforms were switched essentially. Woodrow Wilson won with the same voter base that the Republicans rely on nowadays, and he put Eugene Debs in jail simply for protesting against the war, protesting against American involvement in World War I. He went to prison for that and ran for president from prison and won over 1 million votes, which is very impressive. So this kind of stuff just goes to show that in the United States, I mean, even with the First Amendment, you have the right to speak your mind as long as it's not going to accomplish anything. Essentially, you can go out into the street alone and shout the N-word if you want, shout about whatever, about communism, about Nazism, about this or that. You can do that because it's not going to be productive, and someone might take issue with what you're saying. But there's nothing productive that's going to come out of that. And to be honest, it's not only in the situation of you going alone onto the street either. This is maybe an unpopular opinion among leftists, but I also think that a lot of protests are a complete waste of time also. They accomplish absolutely nothing when people go out into the streets and chant stuff and don't connect it to any sort of like wider campaign or anything, which most protests are not a part of. And people just go onto the street and shout things and then say, what a great society we live in. We can say whatever we want in groups and as individuals. When what's funny is that the dual, this is really a double-edged sword, because the fact that people believe that going out into the streets and protesting is an expression, some sort of productive expression of democratic thought, is actually a double-edged sword, because the United States government and European governments as well use this as ammunition against countries that it deems to be authoritarian because they don't get with the Western foreign policy program. They say, oh, look at our countries. We have protests. People yell things and nobody gets arrested or killed or anything. But look at you, you're repressing our protests that were organized by groups in your country that we funded through our NGOs connected to our State Department. These protests in these countries that the West calls authoritarian a lot of the time are actually trying to overthrow the government, and they're very well organized. Many of the leaders are educated in the West. This is a very common repeating situation. in countries that the West doesn't like. And I guarantee you, if the script was flipped, the Western governments would react exactly the same. They would react with repressive measures. They would put the leaders in jail because they pose an existential threat to the government. This is how governments all over the world act. This is, a government, if it's under threat, it's going to defend itself. And there's really no difference in that respect between the West and countries that the West doesn't like. It's completely hypocritical to think otherwise. Just the West has a really good way of making people believe that going out to protest in the street about some issue that is really not that of that critical nature is somehow productive, is somehow an outgrowth of a healthy democratic society. It's a complete illusion that we've constructed for our people in the West, to be honest. And that's why the main thing I want to mention about that is basically that the First Amendment is there to trick you, essentially. I don't know if it was made to trick people, but I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest, because obviously the Constitution was written by slave owners and rich people who didn't have that much in common with even the poor Americans at that time. But at least now it's definitely there to trick you, and it doesn't offer you any serious freedom. And that much we can see in the material world, in the material conditions, in the material events that we've seen play out, specifically with the Uhuru Movement and the Black Panthers, and every other time, and not just Black liberation organizations, with any organizations that have actually been able to get enough strength to challenge the system. I mean, the other organization that comes to mind is the American Communist Party. At its heyday, they deployed McCarthyism against them. And not only McCarthyism, to be honest, if you want to learn about the history of the Communist Party in the United States, it was very militant and it was very brutally repressed, specifically in the South by the state governments there. You should read this book called Hammer and Hoe. It's very good. But that's basically what I have to say in this live stream about how this is just another example of how the U.S. government uses authoritarian tactics, authoritarian measures, arbitrarily without any sort of good explanation, while calling it a defense of democracy. It really reminded me of that part of Star Wars when, I'm not really a huge Star Wars nerd, but I liked the movies. But when the Emperor essentially announced the end of democracy to the Senate, in a way that sounded like it was the birth of democracy, but obviously in the United States that's been, I think that's been long gone. Ever since capitalism reached its imperialist stage in the United States, when we started having money primaries, when the two major political parties emerged and were under the direct control of big business, that essentially is when democracy died entirely. But I see some donations in the chat. So before I end, I'd like to address them. U.S. government hates true black nationalist socialists, but loves the so-called BLM. Exactly. You know what, Kenneth? Thank you very much for your donations, by the way. It's interesting that BLM has not said anything about the U.S. government's repression of another black liberation organization, but Tucker Carlson, the apparent CIA asset, according to liberals and idiots who just watch MSNBC and CNN and think Fox News is like the Satan of media or whatever. It's Tucker Carlson that actually stuck up for these people, not Black Lives Matter. It's absolutely insane. It just goes to show that we live in such a strange time period where people on the right wing are more like true leftists than actual people on the left. And it's like that in a lot of places in the world right now for some reason. Even in the Ukraine conflict, it's really before the military operation began, the militias of the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics, they were made up of a coalition of communists and monarchists fighting like neo-Nazis and liberals on the Ukrainian side. It's like crazy political groupings that would have been unheard of 100 years ago. But to answer your question, Kenneth, about is Russia capitalist, socialist, or does it have a mixed economy or of both planned and free market economy? This is a really good question, and to be honest, I've been thinking of writing a book about it. It's a thing that I've studied pretty extensively. My position is that Russia is, well, if you ever read the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte that Karl Marx wrote back in the 1800s about about Louis Bonaparte, or Napoleon III rather, about how he was basically a politician or a military politician that was able to use the state bureaucracy to create a society in which no class was in control over the other, but the state bureaucracy in itself was controlling everything. Even though there was a bourgeoisie, the bourgeoisie did not control the state controlled the bourgeoisie. In the situation in Russia right now, I would say that's the same thing. I don't think the bourgeoisie is in control here. They exist, but they're not in control of the government. The government tells them what to do if they want to remain part of the bourgeois class. And this is under Putin's administration. Russia's basically run like a state capitalist society right now. But it's not part of the Western finance capital sphere. That's another thing, you know. So like accusations that it's imperialist are just really nonsense. So, but anyway, thank you everyone for joining us on this live stream. Thank you for the donations. I hope you found this information useful. We're gonna try to get in contact with people from the Uhuru Movement and do an interview a little bit later on, so we can get some more details about this and everything. But yeah, so I'm gonna end the live stream here. Once again, thank you all for joining us, whether it's on Telegram or YouTube. If you don't follow us on Telegram already, like I said in the beginning of the video, definitely give us a follow at The Revolution Report without any spaces or anything. And yeah, we'll see you in the next video or the next live stream. And workers of the